This is required. Like, this is not optional. It's required. And I don't care how good your kid is or how smart they are. Everybody's curious about sex. Everybody.
Welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. I'm your host, Debbie Reber. This week, I'm bringing back to the podcast sexuality educator and parenting expert Amy Lang for a follow-up conversation about online pornography. I know this is something on many parents' minds right now as kids are spending more and more time online during the pandemic. After hearing from more and more anxious parents and knowing from my past conversations with Amy just how important it is that kids have the information and context they need about porn, I wanted to have a frank conversation about how parents can initiate and continue to have conversations with their kids about sexuality. Amy is passionate about helping parents get comfortable being uncomfortable and fostering a dynamic with their children that will result in healthy attitudes around sexuality. In our conversation, I asked Amy to shed some light on what she is seeing and hearing from parents during the pandemic, what parents should be looking out for right now, and the literal words that parents can use to start these important conversations with their kids. Also, if you haven't heard my other conversations with Amy, be sure to check them out. Episode 44 is about sex education and differently wired kids, and episode 102 is about pornography specifically. Also, if you listen to the show with your kids, this may be one that you would ask them to leave the room for. And now here is my conversation with Amy. Hey, Amy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to talk to you and your people.
Yes, this is another important conversation that we need to have. And I think we've talked for the show a couple of times before, and I think it's important to kind of update and check in because of what's happening in the world and COVID and just the amount of time our kids are spending online and spending alone and feeling isolated and all of that stuff. So before we start talking about that, can you just take a few minutes and do your general introductory spiel about yourself?
I'm happy to. So I am a sexuality educator, and I have been for a very long time. Like, I think I'm coming on like 27 years, which scares me. But anyway, so I started out doing pregnancy, abortion, birth control counseling, and then that led me to do general sexual health education and counseling. I worked for Planned Parenthood for a couple of years, and I just had figured I was going to be an amazing sex talker when I had kids. And I had my son Milo, and it turns out that I would rather talk to a pregnant 14-year-old than my 4-year-old about his penis. So that was my little moment where I realized I needed to get some help. So I started doing some research, and I also have a master's degree in adult education. And so while I was figuring this out for myself, I realized that, I could combine my two favorite things, talking about sex and doing adult education. So I did, and that was about 14 years ago, and I started Birds and Bees and Kids, and I've been helping parents and other folks talk with kids about sexuality, love, and relationships. I also focus part of my work on understanding, like, playing doctor, what's normal, what's not, and how to help kids with that. So that's what I do. And sadly, the porn and all that has become, right now in particular, I'm getting lots of emails and calls from folks about, like, what do we do with this time? Exactly what you just said, right? Like, so much more time online. And I'm really glad we're going to be able to talk about this because it's confusing and scary.
It is. And I'm so glad that you do the work that you do. I think for many people, certainly many of my listeners, certainly for me raising my hand, this can sometimes feel really uncomfortable to talk about. But it's so important that we are armed with information. And I think you're doing just such a great service to families everywhere. So thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, let's talk a little bit more about what you are seeing and hearing from people. One of the things I was thinking about in preparing for this was just even in the very beginning of COVID and classes moving online over Zoom. And we were hearing reports of people crashing Zoom rooms and and sharing content that was inappropriate. And, I know that there are just so many things, possibilities, concerns that people have right now. So what are the things that you're noticing and seeing right now as a result of where we are with the COVID pandemic?
Well, I think one of the things that's happened is that before the pandemic, people were pretty loosey-goosey in terms of monitoring and parental controls. Because lots of folks think, oh, my kid would never look at that. My 7-year-old would never Google boobs. My 12-year-old, there's not a possibility that he would be interested in sex in any way. So we had this kind of naivete about, what our kids were going to see. And then, whoops, here's COVID. And here they are online, for hours a day, and they don't have the that backup protection. And so it's really a lot easier for them because they get bored and they Google stuff. Their friends are sending them stuff, and it's just this perfect storm. So the terrible part, the hard part, is that kids are being exposed to way more stuff than they would have been for a variety of reasons. But I'm a bright sider. The bright side is parents are being much more motivated to keep their kids safer online, and that fantasy about exposure is kind of getting chipped away. It's not totally gone. So that's one of the main things that I'm like, that's kind of what happened. And so now what I'm hearing is that my kid's alone in his room. We just figured out that he's been looking at porn. My kids were playing online with someone, and someone said, hey, check this video out. And so also, we're all so stressed out as parents. It's really hard to pay attention, right? Like everybody's a mess. And so that's the other thing is like, oh my God, one more thing, right? Like one more damn thing I have to think about and deal with.
Yes. And you just really summed it up. Sorry, I'm sitting with that word, one more damn thing that we have to be thinking about because this is an incredibly stressful time. And I am hearing so much from families who are struggling to get their kids to attend to their classes and to just kind of navigate hybrid or remote learning. And this just feels cruel that this is an additional thing we have to be really concerned about. So first of all, I'm wondering how you said that people are figuring out that this has happened or is happening with their kids. How are parents becoming aware that their kids may be exploring content that is not appropriate for them?
Usually they're stumbling upon it. Like they might think, oh, I should probably check the browser history because they're online so much. And then, oh, surprise, somebody spent a little time looking at something that, you can't unsee things. Or they're hearing from a friend. Like that's what's happening a lot is like someone will say, hey, my kid saw this stuff and now, I'm worried. And turns out my friend's kid saw it too. So there's like more communication about it. But there's a lot of shame around it. Like, I think people are really embarrassed and ashamed that they didn't take steps to protect their kids online. So it's also not talking, but also I think people have, brains. I mean, just think about it. Like they're thinking about it now, right? And it's this background worry. So it's coming up, like it's kind of top of mind for folks. And then they hear a rumor, they hear a story, it happens to their kid. So it's just, I think it's just kind of come to the surface. And I'm just trying to think of is there like a perfect example? But really the deal is that people suddenly discover that their kid has been looking up boobs. Or like I had a family whose daughter Googled horses and ended up in porn land. So that's the other thing. It's happening innocently. It's not like they all go out and look for, hey, what's a threesome, right? Like they could be looking at something else and misspelling things and, sort of that typical stuff from before. But I also think that the interwebs has gotten a little more savvy in some ways. I'm clearly not a technical person. and so it's pushing that stuff more and more just because of the way like the interwebs are now. It's just different than it was 5 years ago, even.
Mm-hmm. So, you mentioned that parents are feeling embarrassed or ashamed that they haven't had these conversations before. And it is something, right, to hear a conversation like this, like the one we did last year or 2 years ago, where we talked about how important it is to have these conversations. And then now all of a sudden, gosh, I never did that. So, how do you, first of all, talk to parents how do we get parents past that guilt or shame or embarrassment that, they didn't take action and now they may be feeling in addition to the guilt, they may be feeling like it's too late. I've screwed up and now we're in dangerous territory here.
Well, the good news is there's actually a really easy answer to that, which is to apologize and just say, hey, I made a mistake. We made a mistake. We should have been talking to you about this sooner. And, you're old enough now, and here we go. And, the place you actually start is with the sex talks, is with like opening the door to having conversations about sexuality, love, and relationships. So if you use that as your entry point, so you say, hey, we should have been talking with you about sex and all that stuff sooner. And so now we're going to start talking about it. That's the only thing you need to say, especially to older kids, like the 10 and uppers. The apology is really important because it shows them that you're responsible, because you are responsible for their online exposure. It's not their responsibility to be safe online. It's your responsibility. Think about it like putting a seatbelt on, right? We wouldn't let our kids get in the car without a seatbelt. So that apology. And then with kids who are 10 and under, it's easier because you can just say, hey, you know what? You're old enough now. Because they need to know what like sex is before they can really understand, like fully understand what, the yucky stuff is and have a context for it. And we want them to have a healthy context for sexuality. We don't want them to think that, two guys and a horse and a woman is normal or typical. So we really got to kind of like back up the truck a bit and then enter into the porn conversation. And the good news with talking to older kids is that they can like understand this more quickly, more readily than like an 8-year-old or 7-year-old. So it's kind of one of the things I like about talking with older kids. And sometimes I think parents think, oh, I have to be like all firm and stern and like apologizing. That's going to like take away my power from my child. And actually what happens when we apologize to our kids is that they lean into us. We're human and we're modeling, right? Because they make mistakes too, right? They are going to make mistakes online. They probably already have. And so we want to set them up to understand that like we're here for them. And by apologizing, that's the very first step. And it is not hard to apologize. And it feels good because I'm betting you're sorry.
Well, I just love that language. That was one of my questions too. How do we start these conversations? Literally, what are the words that need to come from our mouth? And so maybe just repeat that one more time for the littles and for 10 and up. Give us that first sentence.
Okay. So the first sentence with the littles, so we're talking like 8 and under, is you just really simply say, hey, you know what? I've been thinking you're old enough now, no matter how old they are, you're old enough now for us to start talking about bodies, baby making, boundaries, and all that sex stuff. Do you know what that word is? Do you know what that means? And see what they say. And then with little people and everybody, they need books. And then you just say, here's this book. We're going to read this book together. Boom, done. You're off and running. They're much easier to talk to. With the 10 and olders, you apologize and you say, you know what? I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I didn't think you were old enough for us to start talking about this, but now I know you are. So we're going to start talking about sexuality, relationships, consent, all that stuff, because I want you to feel good and confident about this part of life. I want you to know what's healthy and how to, manage this, because it's going to be here before you know it.
We'll be right back after this quick break. During this month of planning and organization for big transitions, rhythms and routines have been absolutely essential for our physical and emotional well-being. So Green Chef nights are reliably and predictably a good night. We know the ingredients will be fresh and prepped, the instructions easy to follow, and the meal delicious. We're all still talking about last week's turkey tacos with mango chimichurri sauce, refried beans, and Monterey Jack cheese. Green Chef contributes to a healthy lifestyle with easy and delicious menus like fresh seasonal salads and grain bowls. And with over 80 weekly meal and market options, plus rotating options to suit a variety of lifestyles, whether Mediterranean, plant-based, calorie-smart, keto, protein-packed, gluten-free, there are always plenty of options to choose from. Whatever you select, you'll get farm-fresh ingredients, organic whole fruits and veggies, and premium proteins, all delivered straight to your door. I love those 4 words. Straight to my door. Oh, and one more thing I love about Green Chef, they have an app, which means it's easy to manage meal preferences and delivery from your phone if you want to. And I, for one, want to. I am in that mode where I'm making the most of little moments like waiting in line at the pharmacy or for the F train to pull into the station to tackle all of those to-dos. So the convenience of an app is key for me. Green Chef has a special offer for Tilt listeners. Go to greenchef.com/tilt50 and use code TILT50 to get 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months. That's 50% off plus 20% off your next 2 months when you use the code TILT50 at greenchef.com/tilt50. Maybe I've watched too many seasons of The Amazing Race, but every time I have to go somewhere on the subway, I treat it like a competition. It's all about making the right gut decisions about which route will get me there the fastest. Sometimes those decisions get me where I'm going early, and other times my gambles don't really pay off. Probiotics can't help with most gut decisions, but if your gut needs a little support, Ritual has your back. Their Symbiotic Plus, a 3-in-1 supplement, has clinically studied prebiotics, probiotics, and a postbiotic to support a balanced gut microbiome. I've been using Symbiotic Plus for about 6 months now, and it's become a core part of my morning routine. I take the mini capsule every morning while making my way through my inbox, whether I'm at home or I'm on the road, because it doesn't need to be refrigerated. And the capsule itself is delayed released, which helps it survive the harsh conditions of the upper GI tract for delivery to the colon, and that's exactly where we want it to go. Ritual invested in a study modeling the human colon, which showed that Symbiotic Plus significantly increased microbial diversity and the growth of beneficial bacteria. There's no more shame in your gut game. Symbiotic Plus and Ritual are here to celebrate, not hide your insides. Get 25% off your first month for a limited time at ritual.com/tilt. Start Ritual or add Symbiotic Plus to your subscription today. That's ritual.com/tilt for 25% off. And so what about for even older kids who, I know the statistics say, and you would know better than me, but there's a large percentage of teens who have been exposed to pornography online. I don't know, again, what the exact numbers are, but assuming that teenagers have been exposed in some way, how do we then begin that conversation if we haven't been talking about it before?
So again, you just want to say, I'm all about the apology with this. So you say, hey, and look, here's the thing. I'm really sorry. I'm guessing you've probably seen some porn or your friends have. And here's the deal. I should have been talking to you about this from the beginning, but I'm uncomfortable. And I also just want to let you know that, porn is not healthy. It's not real sexuality. It's not real sex. It's like a cartoon. People don't look like that, do stuff like that, when they're having, a typical, normal, regular, whatever sex life. And they are going to be like, I don't want to talk about this. And then, with the porn thing, we just have to talk about it. And doing a little research about language to use. There's some okay places to get information about how to talk to kids about porn. A lot of it, unfortunately, is really sort of shame-based. So just being clear, it's normal to be curious. This is not a healthy place to get your information. And then kind of seeing what they say and do. And if you have not had monitoring on their devices, then you say, and here's the deal. We're going to be putting monitoring on your devices. We want to make sure that you're safe and that you're making good decisions when you're online. And they're not going to like it, but you just tell them it's the price of admission. And remember, you're the parent, you're the boss of their everything. And if you're really late to the game, like they're 17, 18, 19, then don't bother because you're just going to look you're going to look really dumb. And so, there's this point where, not that the ship has sailed, but you really in terms of the internet stuff, the online, the monitoring and stuff, it is kind of pointless. But the good thing about having older kids, I'm all for 12, 13 and over, just talk about all of it. So don't be cagey about it. Just be straight up about the impact of pornography. There's a website, Make Love Not Porn. She's got some really good resources there. And, do some research yourself about how to talk about porn with teenagers in a way that's not shaming, because they've seen it. They may be using it. You really want to be clear that it's not again, back to that, it's not healthy sexuality. It's not normal sexuality. And then see what they do with it. And they may be all grunty and not respondy and telling you they've got it, but they don't.
Okay. That's so helpful. And I would like to know a little bit more about the monitoring software. are there, I don't know if there are certain ones that you recommend. So certainly you're an advocate of that, especially for kids who are under 17. But is that something that parents should let any child know that they're doing? Or is it something that with younger kids you just do and they don't need to know? How do you handle that?
Well, we don't do any spying. So what you say is, hey, we're putting monitoring and parental controls onto all of the devices that you access the internet on, which could be horrific. Like there could be a lot of them. And you just be straight up about it. And then you tell them why. We want you to be safe online. There's a lot of yucky stuff out there. And we're going to be watching where you go online. This is to keep you safe. And if we see something that we're worried about, we'll just have a conversation about it. And think about it like guardrails. So when they're really little, ideally they are not even really able to get online, like 5 and 6 and under. They shouldn't be able to go anywhere on the interwebs. And if they do, it needs to be super locked down. And as they get older, you can remove some of the parental controls. You're always going to monitor. You're going to monitor. And then by the time they're in middle school, they should have free range. They should be able to go anywhere they want on the internet, but you're still monitoring. So you get a weekly, daily digest, couple of products that are really good. Circle and Bark are really great. They're easy to install. There's a thingamajig that gets attached to the router. Again, I'm not technical. There's an app. You can do things like if someday when people can come to your house again, you can make the internet not work for anyone. So you can turn things off and on. You can make a time when they can be online. They're really, really helpful. I know some of your listeners are not in the US. So Qustodio, which is Qustodio, that works in other countries other than the US. This is required. Like this is not optional. It's required. And I don't care how good your kid is or how smart they are. Everybody's curious about sex. Everybody.
Okay. Thank you for sharing that. And listeners, I'll include these in the show notes as well. So if you didn't have a chance to write them down, check out the show notes and you can look into those monitoring devices or software, thingamajiggies, to use Amy's words. So I guess I'd love to know, in addition to monitoring, are there other things that parents should be looking out for? Like, are there signs that we can tune into to know if our kids have been exposed to something or troubled by something they've seen?
Yeah. So like if we're looking behaviorally with younger kids, their behavior might change. So they might seem, and this is just such a hard time, right? Because all of her behavior has changed. But if they're particularly withdrawn, so these are like pre-puberty people. Particularly withdrawn, they seem more anxious. They are sneaking or hiding when they're online. Like if you walk in, like I had one family tell me that they let their kiddo they were actually on vacation and this was before. They were kind of loosey-goosey and he had the iPad and he was really interested in birth. And so they've been watching birth videos. So he was up in his bedroom and the mom came in and he just took that iPad and like shoved it against his chest. And, little kids are awesome because they can't hide crap, right? Mm-hmm. Like, so he's all weird looking and she's like, what's going on? And he had found his way to porn. So you want to like watch their behavior around it. So if they seem sneaky, secretive, if they just seem uncomfortable or weird. And again, before this was easier to spot because there's a lot of reasons to be all those ways right now. And trust your gut and check and ask. You can just say, hey, have you seen anything yucky or weird or scary online? And did you hear my tone right there? Hey, like, how's the weather? Like same tone, like really chill, don't have an event. And so just check in with them and see what they say. And it's super important to say you won't be in trouble. If you tell me you won't be in trouble, just want to make sure you're safe. And then with the older kids, lots of time. I mean, again, this is hard with teenagers, right? Like lots of time in the room, in their bedroom, with their phones, with their devices, being really like secretive about their phones and like not letting you see anything, like being weird if you have access to their phone. If you've noticed any adult-like banter, because we should all be kind of listening in when our kids are talking with each other. So any kind of adult-like banter, if you hear really gross slang, which I'm not allowed to use right now, but think of the things that are kind of ugly words for private parts and sex acts. So if you hear anything like that, and then again, just check in and say, hey, how are you doing with this? Like, I know this is something that lots of kids see. You can tell me if you've used it. It can become really a problem for folks. One of the problems about right now in porn use is that people use it to relieve anxiety. And oftentimes that's why they're using it. It's kind of a tool to help themselves feel better, even though it's backward, right? That doesn't make sense to us as adults, but it may, because I know some of people who are listening right now, you use porn and you might not use it in a healthy way. So thinking about it in terms of behavior changes and secrecy and, your kids. So if they're being weirder than normal, again, technical terms, if your gut tells you something's off, something is off, right? We all know as parents, if we ignore our intuition, that we're making a mistake. Our intuition is rarely wrong.
Right. So I know, we talked about this in the last conversation we had about this, and also I'll link to that in the show notes because listeners definitely check that out. It was a great conversation. We went deeper into some of these topics, but I know that there is a belief that talking about these things will actually create more curiosity. And, we might be basically opening the door and saying, oh, all of this stuff exists, and kids might be more inclined to check it out. So why does actually talking about pornography, talking about sex in general, actually help keep kids safer online?
Well, if they already know what sex is and they already know your values about it and they already know from an early age that the place to learn about sex is from you because you should be their go-to person, and you can say, I'm your go-to for this. I know a lot about this part of life. And if I don't know, I'll figure out the answer. That's why we have books for you to look at. There's some really great videos at amaze.org. These are safe places to learn about this. And, an informed child is an empowered child, and an empowered child feels better and they make better decisions. Because if your kid knows what sex is, it's really easy to say, and P.S., there's this stuff called porn. It is sexual. It is not for kids. It's adult stuff. It can really mess you up. Can be really scary and confusing. So we're talking to you about this now so that when you see that, you'll have a better understanding of what it is and you'll be less curious because it does decrease curiosity if they have safe places to go and they know they can talk to you. So if they have a question about their body, why are they getting boners 24/7? If they have a safe place to go to learn about that, there's some good puberty books, which I can hook you up with. If they have a safe place to go read about the random acts of senseless boners, they're going to be less likely to Google that, right? Mm-hmm. And really just helping them understand, we want them to have this basis of healthy sexuality. We want to be sex positive with our kids, which doesn't mean we're promoting polyamory and BDSM and all of that. I think people don't understand what sex positive means. It means that we present sexuality as a healthy, positive, wonderful, fun part of life. And imagine if that's the message you got when you were growing up. So it protects them, and it's not a silver bullet. It isn't, but it gives you, when you know that you've been working hard on this part of parenting, if they see it, they're going to be less likely to not look at it because their curiosity has already been satisfied elsewhere. And, with older kids, I have a whole bunch of sexy books for young adult books for kids to look at and to read, helping them understand that, sexuality requires and sex requires imagination, and that when we look at porn, we think that's sex, so it takes away imagination. So just helping them to see the bigger picture and, like I said, it isn't going to fix it all, but it will definitely help them make different decisions.
Mm-hmm. We'll be right back after this quick break. Hey there, it's Debbie. I love making this show and sharing conversations about how to support our awesome neurodivergent kids. I've seen how even one little insight from an interview can spark a big shift in daily life. But I know that raising complex kids can be messy and lonely. And just when we think we figured it out, something comes up that boots us right back to feeling overwhelmed and stuck. That's why I've poured everything into creating a way for parents like us navigating complex parenting journeys to join together and chart a path that feels positive, hopeful, and doable. It's the brand new Differently Wired Club experience. In the club, you'll get personal support from me and other seasoned parent coaches, 6 live calls every month where you can connect and get your personal questions answered, the opportunity to learn directly from authors and experts like I have on this show, monthly themes for getting specific and tactical, an exclusive private podcast feed, and the best, most generous community of parents. Seriously, these folks show up for themselves and each other, and that right there is really everything, because it's a daily reminder that we're not alone. Our kids aren't broken, and we have totally got this. The recently rebooted Differently Wired Club is on a brand new platform with its very own iOS and Android app. It is such a great space. However you learn, whatever your style, no matter the ages, genders, and neurodivergent profile of your children, the Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Join us today by going to tiltparenting.com/club. That's tiltparenting.com/club. I hope to see you on the inside.
If you like this show, there's a decent chance you'll also enjoy the Shameless Mom Academy. Hi, I'm Sarah Dean, the founder and host of the Shameless Mom Academy. The Shameless Mom Academy is a podcast for moms that centers moms more than it centers your kids. I'm not going to teach you how to make baby food or how to make your 3-year-old or 13-year-old stop having tantrums. Instead, I'm going to bring you back to yourself. For the last 20 years, I've been helping moms through growth and transformation. Inside the Shameless Mom Academy, I help you identify who you are and who you are becoming. Look, motherhood is hard. It brought me to my knees many times and sometimes still does. Returning to who I am and who I am becoming allows me to decide how to show up in all those sticky motherhood moments, but also in all my other relationships and in all the ways I show up in my various communities. So come check out the Shameless Mom Academy wherever you listen to podcasts. I'm willing to bet you'll leave feeling a little inspired and maybe even completely fired up. And you'll probably laugh a few times because I promise we never take ourselves too seriously over here. With 700 episodes to choose from, you're likely going to find something that sparks and speaks to you inside the Shameless Mom Academy.
Also, for listeners, the very first conversation I had with Amy, which was probably in year 1 of this podcast, was just about having, the talk. It was about sex ed for differently wired kids. So I will also include a link to that in the show notes. It's definitely worth going back and listening to that if you haven't yet had these conversations, or maybe you have, but you want to make sure that you've covered it the way that is best for your family. So one last question, and then I would love you to tell us a little bit about where people can reach you and to tell us about your awesome podcast, which I just love. So is there anything else that we can be proactively doing to protect our kids, especially during this time when we know that they're just more isolated and more vulnerable to everything that we've been discussing today?
Yeah, I would say turn it off. I would say, I know it's hard for all of us, but to turn it off, have a day where no one is online. And that's going to mean you're going to have to interact with people, and it's going to give everybody's brain and body a break from this. So having scheduled times where they turn it off. This is why you have monitoring, because you can shut it off. You can literally make it so they cannot get online. Making sure they don't have any devices in their bedroom after a certain time. Talking openly about it, really helping them to understand that looking at that stuff is just going to increase their anxiety. Their isolation now is just so hard. So figuring out ways for them to have play dates with their friends that are online. If they are gaming, which I know everybody is, just make sure they can't go anywhere online when they're gaming. And again, this is about conversation and connection. I think we're all feeling disconnected in multiple ways. So finding time where you are filling their love bucket, one of my favorite things to do with kids is something called special time, which is where you let them lead the play and you don't boss them around at all. They're in charge of what you're doing. That also will help them feel more calm and satisfied. And I wish that we weren't having this time like we all do. And it's a challenge to parenting, right? But, parenting is hard. And, maybe I'm adding some, I'm piling on a little more hard to your parenting, but the outcome is going to be better for everyone. And we'll feel better. You will feel better. And which is really important, because if you feel better, they're going to feel better, right? Everybody's pinging off everybody else right now.
So true. So tell us about the resources that you have available at Birds and Bees and Kids, and tell us about your awesome Just Say This podcast.
So on my website, birdsandbeesandkids.com, there's a bunch of stuff there for you. I have an online resource center called the Birds and Bees Solutions Center, and that is like a one-stop shop for you to have these conversations. It's pretty much got everything you need in it to become their go-to. I have a online bookstore with curated books by age group, so you can see like a bunch of different options for your books. I've been blogging since God was a boy, so there's tons of stuff in my blog. And just lots and lots of opportunities. And I also do quickies with parents, which is just a 30-minute consultation. So if you have something that's feeling urgent, you can get to me. We can take care of a lot in half an hour, it turns out. And then my podcast, which I am super happy with. And thank you for saying it's awesome. It's called Just Say This, and it's advice column style. So parents call in, leave me a voicemail, and then I answer it on the show. And it is everything from, I think this week's episode is anal sex, somebody asking about that, a kid asking about that, something about a 12-year-old girl, and I don't remember a puberty thing, and then something about a 3-year-old playing doctor. So it's totally potluck. I just answer whatever feels right to me in the moment. So it's been super fun, and I love advice columns. So it's totally totally my thing.
Mm-hmm. It's great. And also what I also appreciate as someone who listens to many podcasts is the episodes are 15, 20 minutes. So, and again, if you look at the titles, you can see, so I can just scroll through. I'm like, oh, I need to know about this because this has come up in our house. And then I can just get your very smart, brief answer to that question. And I feel so much more informed, and information helps you feel less anxious. So it's just such a great thing you're putting out there.
Thank you. Yeah. And I actually, if you decide to listen to it, listen to every episode, because you're going to get something out of the 3-year-old playing doctor, because it might be like your kid might have played doctor at 3. And then when you hear, oh yeah, this is completely typical, it's going to relieve your stress. Because if you've been thinking that your child's like Hector the molester, but they were just curious about their friend's vulva, that actually goes a long way to relieving that anxiety just in parenting in general. And, I'm not for everyone. There's a lot of swearing. And I am very direct. So yeah, thank you. Thank you, Debbie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for everything that you shared today. And hopefully this, information is going to help people feel like they've got more tools, more resources, and we can eliminate some of those deer in the headlights moments. And I just encourage everyone to check out the resources that Amy shared today. Thank you so much. And I look forward to our next conversation. We'll be out of COVID and we'll have something else to discuss.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. For the show notes for this episode, visit tiltparenting.com/podcast and search for this conversation. If you like what you heard on today's episode, I would be grateful if you could take a minute to head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a rating or a review. Thank you so much for helping us stay visible so people who would benefit from the show can easily find it. If you want to support the show and help me cover the cost of production, please consider joining my Patreon campaign. To support the show, just visit patreon.com/tiltparenting. Lastly, if you aren't already part of the online community at Tilt, I invite you to sign up at tiltparenting.com on the box in the bottom where it says Join the Revolution. Every Thursday, I send out a short email with a quick note from me, a link to that week's podcast episode, and links to 5 stories from the news that week that are relevant to parents like us. Again, you can sign up and learn more about Tilt at www.tiltparenting.com.
If you're a parent, I invite you to join us at the Mindful Mama podcast, where it's all about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. With sometimes hilarious and always thought-provoking experts and friends, at Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have. And when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm Hunter Clark Fields, and I can't wait to see you there. Listen in to the Mindful Mama podcast.